Hey guys, if you think birthdays are supposed to be special, wait until you hear what happened to me on my 21st. Make sure to subscribe and hit that like button, because this story, well, it's going to blow your mind. Trust me. I grew up in a family that loved sports more than people. And when I say sports, I mean my brother, Josh. He was a natural athlete, always the golden child. Our parents cheered him on, posted his victories online, and celebrated every goal, touchdown, and home run, while I mostly faded into the background. Growing up, I learned to sit quietly, smile when needed, and avoid asking for attention. I tried to find small ways to shine, good grades, helping around the house, and quietly achieving things I was proud of, but none of it ever seemed to matter. By the time my 21st birthday rolled around, I thought maybe, just maybe, things would be different. I didn't want a huge party. I just wanted a few heartfelt words, a card, something to show that my day counted. I woke up that morning feeling hopeful. I had baked cupcakes for the family, bought a small cake, and even left a note in the living room, hoping my parents or Josh would see it and join me. By noon, I realized something was wrong. The house was empty. No birthday wishes. No hugs. My parents were glued to the TV. Josh? He had a big game that afternoon and had already left, barely saying, "Happy birthday," as he grabbed his gear. I tried not to let it ruin me. I sat alone, scrolling through social media, seeing friends post birthday photos with their families. And that's when the silent treatment really hit me. My family didn't just forget, they actively ignored me. It felt intentional. At first, I tried to convince myself it was no big deal. "It's just one day," I muttered under my breath. But as the hours ticked by, the pain turned into simmering anger. I remembered every time Josh got praised for small accomplishments while my efforts went unnoticed. Every missed birthday, every overlooked achievement. And suddenly, I realized something. The universe gives everyone chances to tip the scales. Sometimes it's money, sometimes opportunity, sometimes luck. And I knew deep down that one day, I'd get mine. Weeks after that 21st birthday, I bought a lottery ticket on a whim. Nothing big, just $1, a laugh. But there's something about that small, hopeful moment. That ticket, tucked in my wallet, was more than a piece of paper. It was a seed. A silent promise to myself that someday, I would get my day. I didn't know it yet, but that ticket would change everything. Not just my life, but the lives of the people who had ignored me, laughed at me, and underestimated me. Now, I'm not going to lie. If I told you what happened next, you might not believe it. But this story? It's about betrayal, patience, and the most satisfying revenge you can imagine. Make sure to subscribe because the next part is where the plan begins, and it's shocking. Even in those quiet, lonely moments after my birthday, I started imagining possibilities. What if I could turn the tables? What if the universe gave me the chance to make them realize what they had lost? I didn't have a plan yet. I didn't even know how. But I knew one thing, my family's neglect had planted a seed, and that seed was about to grow into something no one saw coming. And that's where the story really begins, because sometimes, the smallest moments of hurt lead to the biggest surprises. The day after my 21st, I thought maybe it had been a fluke. Maybe my parents and Josh didn't realize how much they hurt me. I tried to talk to them. "Hey, yesterday was my birthday," I said casually at breakfast. Mom barely looked up from her coffee. "Yeah, well, Josh had a big game. You know how it is." Josh grinned and said, "Don't worry. There's always next year. Next year. Next year." Those words hit me like a punch. I realized something I had suspected but didn't want to admit. They didn't see me as important. My birthday, my feelings, my milestones, they didn't matter. I began reflecting on the years before. Every birthday, every achievement, every moment I hoped for recognition, it was overshadowed by Josh. Soccer, basketball, school awards, college acceptances, he got the attention, the praise, the love. I got a pat on the head and a generic, "good job." I remembered the time I stayed up late baking cookies for my little brother's school fundraiser. Mom barely noticed. Josh got a trophy for a game, and the house exploded with pride. It wasn't just neglect, it was favoritism. And the realization stung. I was part of a family that measured worth by performance and entertainment value, not love or kindness. I tried to bury the pain, but it kept surfacing. At night, I'd lie awake replaying moments from my birthday, the empty living room, the cake untouched, Josh's grin, Mom scrolling through her phone instead of saying, "Happy birthday." The silent treatment wasn't just a one-time slight. It was a pattern. And patterns are dangerous, they shape how you see yourself. I began asking myself hard questions. Why did I care so much for people who clearly didn't value me? Why did I allow myself to be invisible? And then, slowly, the anger started to take root. Not impulsive rage. A quiet, simmering determination. Weeks later, while helping around the house, I overheard my parents talking about money. They were stressed about bills and mortgage payments. They argued about which credit card to use and which bills could be delayed. Josh was bragging about a big prize he had won at his game, completely oblivious to the financial stress his family was under. That's when I realized something important. They were careless. They ignored birthdays, overlooked responsibilities, and took life for granted. If I had the right resources, I could turn that carelessness into leverage. I kept my lottery ticket tucked away, almost forgetting about it. But every time I thought about my 21st, the injustice burned brighter. The ticket became more than luck, it became a symbol of opportunity. I began imagining possibilities, a quiet, clever way to make my family understand the weight of their neglect. Not violence. Not humiliation. Something subtle, ironic, and unforgettable. Something that would turn the tables without a word spoken. I didn't know exactly how yet, but I knew I had a weapon, and I knew my family had a weakness. After the betrayal discovery, I didn't roar. I retreated. Some people imagine revenge as fiery and immediate, but for me it was a slow burn. Days blurred into nights. I would make small meals and stare at the corner of the ceiling, thinking of every missed, happy birthday, every time Josh's name lit up the house like neon while mine barely whispered in the background. I started keeping a little journal. Not for theatrics, just to keep my head straight. I wrote what they said, what they didn't say, small incidents that had piled on. The seasonal card my parents sent to Josh with a long, sentimental note and the two-line, "Congrats," they scribbled in my graduation card. I wrote the hollow, "There's always next year," that Josh said like a practiced line. Naming the pain made it less amorphous. It grounded the plan. Because once pain is named, you can do something with it. Weeks passed. I forgot about the ticket until one morning, the cold kind where the coffee doesn't help, when I checked it for the hell of it. I matched 3 numbers, then 4, then 5. My hands shook as I matched the final number and realized the truth. I'd hit the jackpot. This wasn't a movie-sized fortune, but it was enough to change lives. I sat on the floor of my tiny apartment with the ticket in my hand and the silence of possibility all around me. Joy raced, then guilt, because I was thinking of all the ways I could spend it on myself, move to a new city, travel, finally buy a decent laptop. I thought about calling my parents, letting them soak in the surprise. I pictured their faces, the way Mom's eyes crinkled, or Josh's awkward grin. Instead, anger flared back into me. I thought of that lonely cupcake on my 21st, the empty living room, the way my birthday had been swallowed by a TV game. The lottery ticket glowed like a loaded coin. It could be a gift, or it could be a choice. And for reasons I couldn't fully explain then, the choice I wanted felt colder and cleaner. I wanted them to feel small in the way I had felt. I slept very little in those first days. I woke at dawn and wrote pros and cons like a rational person would, as if I had 2 minds, the wounded child and the adult who knew the world required careful moves. There was a moral panic inside me. Buying their house anonymously? Evicting them? That sounded mean in a voice I recognized, the voice of the person who used to bake cookies for neighborhood fundraisers and cried at puppy rescue videos. I wrestled with the image of my mother yelling in the driveway, of Josh's face when he realized the house wasn't theirs anymore. But the alternative, doing nothing, felt like agreeing to be invisible forever. I thought about how they had already cost me my sense of belonging. Maybe what I wanted wasn't to humiliate them for sport, but to force them to reckon with the emotional neglect, to make them feel the fear of losing home, of losing stability. I didn't want them to be homeless. I wanted them to taste uncertainty, to sit across from each other and wonder what they had taken for granted. That idea made me feel like a villain and a kind of medicine at the same time. I told myself, I'll be strategic, humane. No cruelty beyond the shock. I would not publicly shame them, I would simply become the owner and let the consequences do the talking. Let the foreclosure process, the legal notices, the professional face of eviction do the humiliating part, not me. I needed a plan that was airtight, anonymous, and legally clean. Emotional satisfaction wouldn't matter if the execution left a trail back to me. So I broke it down. Anonymous purchase, would use an LLC and third-party agents to place bids and transfer funds, so my name wouldn't appear in any initial searches. Timing, would wait until the house went to auction or the foreclosure sale, then I'd outbid others anonymously. Legal insulation, I'd hire a real estate attorney and a trust to manage the purchase, ensuring all paperwork was handled professionally. Optics, no public drama. No viral posts. I wanted private astonishment, the eviction notices, the mortgage messages, the eventual reveal that the owner had bought the house. That reveal would land during a pivot point when the family was already scrambling. I spent days researching county rules, foreclosure timelines, and LLC formation. I watched tutorials, read through legal forums, and even called a paralegal anonymously to ask procedural questions. All of this was a blur of legalese and caution, trustee sales, notice of default, redemption periods. The more I learned, the more I felt like I was building a chessboard that only I could see. I opened a bank account in the LLC's name, wired funds through a trust, and interviewed attorneys without giving my name. One lawyer, a patient woman named Claire, I remember the irony, explained how to make sure the purchase couldn't be reversed or traced easily. If done correctly, she said, it'll show up simply as a standard real estate transaction. Your anonymity will be protected under the entity. Her voice made the plan feel real and legal, not vengeful in a way that would harm me. That was crucial. While the lawyers handled the technicalities, I had to prepare mentally. I rehearsed the reveal. I imagined the moment, their dishes clattering as a notice arrived, my mother pacing, Josh swearing and blaming a referee for everything. I imagined sitting on a beach in another city, watching the fallout from a safe distance. But I needed guardrails for my own conscience. I decided, clearly and firmly, that I would not gloat. I would not post or tell mutual friends. The reveal had to be surgical, almost clinical. My goal wasn't to destroy them, it was to wake them. If there was growth, so be it. If not, then at least I'd have the comfort of knowing I no longer lived under their indifference. Nothing worth doing sails smoothly. A few times, the bank wanted additional documentation. A trustee office delayed the auction. My nerves frayed when I misread a filing deadline and had to wire an extra tranche of money. Once, my mother called me out of the blue asking about a missing check. She sounded worried, and for a second my heart cracked. But I reminded myself of why I'd started, the long list of missed birthdays, the house of neglect built quietly over years. I also had fantasies of sending them a small card on another birthday, a simple, I was here, but restraint held. My plan relied on patience. The legal machine moves on its own timeline, and I learned to let it. Each delay was an act of discipline, not defeat. Weeks later, the house went up for sale in a trustee auction. The bidding would be online. I'd set up the LLC's account, funded the trust, and tested the anonymous bidding platform. I'd watch from the closest coffee shop with a nervousness I hadn't felt since I was a kid waiting for a report card. When bidding started, my hands trembled but my heart was steady. I placed the bid deliberately, not to bankrupt them, but high enough to ensure I'd win. The others dropped off one by one. When the gavel finally registered on the screen, the house was mine, through my LLC, through a trust, legally and cleanly. I felt the strange mix of triumph and hollowness. I'd done what I had set out to do. But the reveal was yet to come. I had to wait for the proper moment, the issuance of the notice to vacate, the foreclosure papers, the official transfer emails. I wanted the reveal to be surgical, precise, and unavoidable. The days after the trustee auction felt strange, as if I were walking through an empty movie theater after the credits. Legally, the house was mine through the LLC and trust. Practically, it was still their home, a place of dinner table arguments, remote controls thrown across the couch, and cheap motivational posters in the garage. The paperwork would take its course, notices, redemption periods, trustees' actions. I watched it all from a distance I chose deliberately. No front row seat. No gloating. But the universe has a way of amplifying small sounds into thunder. Early one morning, late autumn, the kind of chill that makes breath visible, I received the first automated notification. A notice of default had moved to notice of sale. The foreclosure timeline was advancing. I felt a cold clarity. The shock would come not in an instant but in a series of professional, official contacts, letters, certified mail, postings, the kind of formal language that makes homeownership suddenly feel bureaucratic and fragile. I wanted them to feel the inevitable weight of those communications. I wanted them to read the dry legalese and ask, aloud, how did this happen? But I also knew that immediate panic could consume them, and panic would be ugly. My aim was a careful unspooling, enough to force awareness, not enough to destroy livelihoods. That ethical line mattered to me. It arrived on a Tuesday, while the TV droned on with pre-game commentary. Mom was making coffee. Josh had left for practice. The notice was served by mail and posted on the front door, the kind of red-stamped envelope that had a way of bending conversations toward panic. Mom opened the letter like you open mail you don't want to read. Her face went pale. She called Dad at work in a voice that trembled. There's something about the mortgage, she breathed. We got a notice about a trustee sale. Her hands shook as she passed the paper to Dad, who read it twice, disbelief dissolving into a tight silence. I didn't watch. I had told myself I would maintain distance. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't imagine their faces. I imagined Mom pacing, Dad muttering calculations, Josh slamming his car door and cursing referees at the top of his lungs. I imagined them together for the first time, not in celebration of Josh's latest score but in shared terror. That shared terror was the gravity of my revenge, a mirror held up to the neglect. Word spread quickly through the household. Maybe it's a mistake, Dad said. We'll call the bank. But the bank was only a phone number on paper until the process gained steam. Months of assumed stability can be toppled by a few letters and the steady, procedural motion of the legal system. I let it be. Their routines collapsed in measured increments. Calls to the mortgage servicer were long and fruitless. You have a notice of sale on file, a polite voice told them. You have until the redemption period ends to remedy it. The reality sank in inch by inch, missed payments, prior debts, the precariousness of credit. They found themselves on the other side of the kind of conversation I'd overheard for years, the one whispered in the kitchen about money that we'll figure out later. Josh's practice seemed suddenly trivial. His phone calls were shorter, his focus blurred during drills. The family dinners, once scheduled around his games, became fraught with whispered math and urgent searches for documents, tax forms, old mortgage statements, anything that might buy them time. The living room, which had been the stage for his highlights, grew quiet and wary, like actors waiting for a scene to end. This was the subtlety I'd wanted. Not dramatic confrontation, but the slow corrosion of the assumption that nothing bad could happen. They were forced to sit with the consequences of their choices, including the choice to ignore the small, quiet moments that made a life worth living for someone else. While the family spun in circles trying to locate a missing check or contact the right loan officer, I quietly ensured the LLC's trustees handled everything by the book. No hasty moves, no taunting letters. Legal notices came as they must, with the antiseptic coldness of officialdom. Then came the practical shock. Lenders and creditors started calling. The utility company warned of pending disconnection if accounts weren't brought current. Mortgage servicers asked for immediate proof of hardship. The house that had been a sanctuary of indifference suddenly became a center of logistical strain. It's amazing how fast domestic certainties unravel when someone misses a payment or a creditor initiates collection processes. The strain pushed them together and apart. They argued in tones I'd never heard before, defensive, exhausted, terrified. My mother cried quietly in the laundry room, which made me feel a human pang I hadn't expected. For a moment, culpability and sympathy tangled, and I was forced to remember the complexity of people who are, at the end of the day, fallible. The legal timeline culminated in a notice to vacate, sometimes called a notice to quit. It's a bright, unnerving document that accelerates fear into action. They received it on a Wednesday, while the kids across the street rode bikes and the neighborhood lawn sprinklers blinked like nothing had changed. Dad stuffed the envelope in his pocket like some tiny infantile hope that he could make it go away. It was time. But before I pulled the final thread, I arranged one thing, the reveal. I wanted to be the one to show up after the official, impersonal notices had done their work, but not as a tormentor. I wanted to show up as the new owner, face to face, and watch the earthquake of recognition. I booked a flight with cash, I rented a cheap sedan, and I prepared to be both cold and quiet. The reveal would not be public, no social media posts, no viral clips, because cruel transparency wasn't the point. The point was the moment, the slow realization that the person who'd been ignored had become the person holding the title, the person in control of their address. I wanted them to look into my eyes and know, in the bluntest way possible, what their neglect cost them emotionally. I arrived on a cold gray morning, the sky the flat color of newsprint. My hands tightened on the envelope that contained the official deed and the LLC's paperwork. I felt oddly calm, a quietness like the one after storm prep. When I walked up the driveway, Mom was at the sink, rinsing a mug with hands that had suddenly become too old for the frantic pace of their life. Josh was sorting cleats, his back to the window, unaware. Dad was at the table with mortgage statements and a pen, muttering numbers. I knocked. The sound seemed too polite for the situation. Mom answered, and when she looked up, I saw the slow unspooling, confusion, recognition, then a strangled hope. Can I help you? She said, that line an automatic domestic reflex. Yes, I said. You can. I'm the new owner of this house. For a strange beat, time did a soft double take. Her eyes flicked to my hand, to the envelope, to nothing. What do you mean? She whispered, like it was a riddle with no answer. I put the deed on the table. It was clean, professional, the kind of paper that meant the world. Josh came in the doorway in a t-shirt, towel in hand, and his face drained of color when he read the top line. For one suspended second, the family of my childhood, the team of neglect and loud TV cheers, was quiet. Not a single cheer for a game. Not a single congratulatory call. Just the far, thin sound of birds. You can't do this, Dad said finally, the denial firm like a shield. This is criminal. You can't take our home. I did it legally, I said. Through a trust. Through an LLC. You were in default. This sale was public. My voice was steady, the shock had already begun to do its necessary work. You have options, there are timelines, redemption periods, and the law has steps to follow. I didn't want to humiliate you publicly. I wanted you to feel the consequences of making me invisible. The room boiled with 1,000 tiny sounds, Dad's breath, Mom's sob, Josh's muttered curses. The eviction machinery would continue. Notices would be mailed, movers would be contacted for eventual removal if they didn't remedy the situation. I handed them contacts for legal aid and a printed outline of their rights and deadlines. That was an odd and very deliberate ethical choice, to be harsh and humane in the same breath. They asked me to sell the house back. They begged, pleaded, and even accused me of being petty. Mom cried a lot. Dad tried to bargain. Josh's anger was loud and naked. He wanted someone to blame, and I stood there like a mirror to everything they'd wanted to ignore. I could have been the monster, I could have pushed them into complete ruin. Instead, I made a different decision. I offered them a timeline and assistance in finding temporary housing. I offered to let them buy the house back at fair market value if they paid down arrears within a given period. In effect, I forced them to take responsibility instead of handing them the easy cushion of denial. The next weeks were a chaos of paperwork, phone calls, and embarrassments. Neighbors whispered, friends called with awkward sympathy. They learned to read the notices with the attention that birthdays and small kindnesses had never earned. They learned, slowly, to ask questions rather than assume safety. I watched from the margins, sometimes calling to check on Mom, sometimes refusing to answer Josh when he shouted. It wasn't vindictive euphoria. It was a complicated relief. After the eviction notices and the reveal that I owned the house, my family was forced to reckon with the consequences of years of neglect. They were shaken, humiliated, and utterly unprepared for a world where I wasn't invisible. But it wasn't about revenge for revenge's sake, it was about clarity. I felt a strange mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. Watching them scramble, reading their emails and hearing their panicked calls to mortgage companies, wasn't pure joy. It was quiet acknowledgement. They finally understood, in a tangible way, what their disregard had cost someone who once loved them unconditionally. In the weeks that followed, I navigated their stunned reactions carefully. I offered guidance on timelines, legal rights, and options for temporary housing, not because I wanted to humiliate them further, but because fairness mattered to me. I wanted their reckoning to be real, but not destructive to the point of regret. This experience taught me the value of patience, strategy, and moral restraint. Revenge isn't about cruelty, it's about creating a moment where truth and consequence intersect. And in that intersection, lessons are learned. They realized that neglect isn't harmless, and I realized that my own voice, once silenced, could command attention without shouting. Looking back, the ordeal taught me that life has a strange way of balancing itself. Hurt and neglect can seem invisible until the right moment arrives. Sometimes, the most powerful actions aren't loud or vindictive, they're precise, strategic, and allow the universe to take care of the rest. I also realized the importance of patience. Acting impulsively might feel satisfying in the moment, but slow, calculated action brings lasting results. Watching my family finally understand the impact of their choices wasn't about gloating, it was about proving to myself that integrity, strategy, and resilience matter more than temporary approval or recognition. Ultimately, success is the quietest, most satisfying form of revenge. It teaches without humiliation, elevates without arrogance, and ensures that the lesson lasts far longer than a shout or a dramatic gesture ever could. Months later, life returned to a strange calm. My family slowly adjusted, and the house remained under my ownership. Conversations grew tentative but respectful. Josh started asking for advice, not because he liked me more, but because the balance had shifted, and now he needed guidance from someone he had ignored. And sometimes, late at night, I think about what comes next. The universe has a way of keeping surprises in store. One small act, a lottery ticket, a quiet plan, can change everything.